In this video, I'm taking a break from the grimdark future and having a brief soiree in Middle-earth. I've heard it's all sunshine, lollipops and rainbows compared with the 41st millennium. I'll be painting the plastic Gandalf miniature from this Fellowship of the Ring set, and having a wee delve into the history of said miniatures. It's time for another miniature escape with Miniscape. In the early 2000s, I was on something of a wargaming hiatus when the Lord of the Rings films were released. Having read the books beforehand, I was a big fan of the Peter Jackson movies, and I still am today. Nevertheless, at the time, I didn't have the inclination to buy any of the models or play the tabletop game. Last year, I introduced one of the Miniscape Juniors to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and of course we were barely one movie in when I began pursuing second-hand goods apps for Lord of the Rings models. There is indeed no lack of fodder on eBay and the like, and this doesn't surprise me. The Lord of the Rings miniatures were a gateway drug for those who had never set foot in a Games Workshop before. So of course, the second-hand market is going to have a reasonable selection after the game has been going for almost a quarter of a century. Still, I had to be cautious. Experience from buying eBay job lots in the past led me to conclude there was a certain fragility to Lord of the Rings models. I had witnessed many Uruk-hai with snapped-off swords and pikes, and poor Gandalf's staff was frequently broken. I guess they had been played with too hard or something. Anyway, while browsing the market, I considered myself luckier than a hobbit in a cave when I found this treasure. An unopened set of the Fellowship of the Ring for £15. Not that this was an old relic, this is the current set sold by Games Workshop. It's still on their web store, even if the box contents are from 2005. And I figured I might be able to churn out some content with this. At the time of recording, the Fellowship of the Ring set is for sale on the Games Workshop web store for £38. But the miniatures were released in 2005 as part of the Mines of Moria set. The hype for this set was real. Months before the release, it was teased in White Dwarf 307, July 2005. This article gave some juicy morsels about the contents of the upcoming set. The price for the set was revealed 2 months later in September 2005 in White Dwarf issue 309. £40 for all you would need to play in a single box. I mean, that's not quite true, is it? It's never just one box when buying miniatures. Zooming in on this image is probably the first time we get a glimpse of the plastic miniatures for the Fellowship of the Ring. Full details would come in the following month in October 2005, White Dwarf issue 310. A double-page spread showcases the 34 plastic miniatures included, the 9-strong Fellowship of the Ring, Moria goblins, and a cave troll. There was also scenery pieces to represent artifacts in Balin's tomb, as well as dice, a getting started book, and a rules manual. To expand your collection and get the same characters in different poses, you could also pick up the Breaking of the Fellowship box. These were cast in metal rather than plastic, and would set you back £25. I think I like the look of these better, to be honest. Legolas is actually looking where he's attacking, although Gandalf has lost his hat, but I suspect from his pose that he's a little busy with a Balrog to worry about his attire. Later in that issue was a battle report section covering 4 scenarios from the Mines of Moria set, reenacted by Andy and Sean. Sean looks a little familiar, wasn't he in the Peter Jackson films? No, I must be confusing him with someone else. And then there's an article about how to build a Balin's Tomb gaming board using the box insert from the Mines of Moria set. Some nice resourceful advice, Games Workshop. It covers how to make ledges and stairs and add texture, and then how to paint the whole thing. Now personally, I wouldn't have used this cardboard to make such a model, perhaps foam core or something more rigid. Nevertheless, this is an accessible tutorial to give a cool-looking, inexpensive playing area. This was a characteristic of White Dwarf articles from this era. When doing some research for this video, most of the issues that I perused had some sort of terrain tutorial for Lord of the Rings, or even Warhammer, or Warhammer 40k. There were guides on converting your miniatures to create individual-looking armies. They even wrote rules to encourage this. Their articles advocated the use of materials from craft shops and hardware shops, or even from your own rubbish bin. They were clearly using such terrain in these articles. I mean, this was obviously a piece of polystyrene packaging, and it still looks great. Yes, it was a different era, before complete monetization, and I'm a little sad I missed out on it, to be honest. But in my defense, I was quite busy getting a degree and wooing the heart of Mrs. Miniscape, which was undoubtedly the correct decision. Opening the box reveals a single sprue containing all 9 of the miniatures, plus the 1 ring. Did this have some function in the game, or was it just there for decorative purposes? The box also comes with more than enough bases for your chaps. While most of them are a single piece, Gandalf comes in 2 pieces, as does Aragorn and Boromir. Before assembly, I clean up the model by scraping off the mould lines with the edge of my blade. Gandalf's staff-holding arm is push-fit and slots into this hole nicely, meaning glue isn't entirely necessary. Similarly, you can easily push him into this base. Games Workshop often do this with miniatures designed for people who are new to the hobby. Anyway, I do use some glue, and then I prime him with Colourforge Matte Black. Now, there's no shortage of reference pictures for Gandalf, but I was using the one on the back of the box as my inspiration. And it looked like his robes were a sort of blue-grey, which would make sense, but this gave me an opportunity to use my favourite kind of blue-grey, Citadel Thunderhawk Blue. I mixed this with a little black on my wet palette, as I gave this sheet one last hurrah before disposal, and then I simply applied this all over his robes. It looks a bit patchy here, but rest assured, I give it more coats later. I then take an excellent brown paint, which is Humbrol 251, which I use to base coat his staff and his belt. Then I return to the robes and give them another coat, this time with another black Thunderhawk Blue mix, just using slightly less black than before. I avoid the recesses this time, as I begin to build up layers of blue. It's definitely in the ugly stage here, but bear with me. As I often say, it's generous to call these tutorials. I just invite you to embark on a journey with a madman. And this is how he looks so far. I decided to give him a wash all over with Nuln Oil to shade the recesses. And then I confess, I set him aside for several months, as I sometimes do with my models. When I finally picked him up again, I brought back some of the grey that had become dull on the raised portions of the robes, and quickly followed this up with some Thunderhawk Blue alone. Again, I avoided the recesses, layering on the Thunderhawk until the layers started to come together to my liking. And this is how he looks after I apply that treatment all over. Now the thing about Gandalf's hat is, it looks a sort of blue-grey in the movies, apparently, but Tolkien describes it as blue in his books. When I was painting his hat, I added a little blue paint to the grey mix, but not enough to make it obvious, so I guess mine looks more movies than books. Engagement is engagement, so by all means fill up the comments section about this bloke's hat, and of course, paint your miniatures however you want them. Fenrisian Grey is a great partner for Thunderhawk Blue. I mix them both together on my wet palette, and then I begin applying them to the edges of the robes. I use short, sharp, parallel strokes along the edges of the robes like this, because I think it gives a nice cloth appearance. In some places, however, I give the typical edge highlight. And this is what it looks like after the first pass of highlighting. The second highlight is done with neat Fenrisian Grey, this time using the same kind of strokes as before, just covering less area. I repeat this process on his hat as well. The final highlight is a mix of white and Fenrisian Grey, going over the same ground as before. It's time for some brown, Flat Brown by Vallejo. I layer this on over the existing brown, on the belt, and on his staff. I cover everything except the deepest recesses, or in places such as where one strap of leather overlaps another. Next I choose Vallejo Tan Earth. I use this to pick out the details on the top of his staff, and also to paint some thin lines down the shaft to make it look more woody. The edges of the leather straps get this treatment as well. I have this pot of Army Painter Barbarian flesh, which I've had for about 300 years. I mix a sort of terracotta red into the barbarian flesh. I'm not sure what this red shade is exactly, since the pot wasn't labelled, and I've also had this for several centuries, but I think something like corn red would work pretty well. The reason for mixing is to make a deeper flesh tone which will go into the recesses, and this goes all over his face and his hands, and will be the darkest flesh shade that will be visible. When that's dry, I use barbarian flesh by itself and paint this over the knuckles on his hands and the raised areas on his face such as his nose, cheeks and forehead. Probably my favourite colour, dark sand, is applied to his beard and his hair. Now this seems a bit strange at first. Clearly he has a grey beard and not a blonde beard. He's not Gandalf the Blonde or Gandalf the Dark Sand, but I have spied hints of beige in my reference picture, so I'm going with this and seeing where the pigment takes me. When that's dry, I use white to pick out the raised areas, and I'll return to his hairy bits later. For now, let's do some metallics. I use Cold Steel by P3 and paint this all over his sword, both the blade and the hilt. I also use it to pick out his buckles on his belts. And now back to the hair. I use Citadel Contrast Skeleton Horde to shade the beard, and I also shade his sword with Nuln Oil. While I'm waiting for all that to dry, I apply a little PVA glue to the base, followed by some sand and a small stone under his foot. This isn't special hobby sand, I literally just scavenged it. Vallejo Model Air Aluminium is used to highlight the edges of his sword, painting thin lines with a fine brush. Humbrol 251 goes all over the texture on the base, and also on the rim. This is then dry brushed with Vallejo Tan Earth. The rock under his foot is painted with Fenrisian grey, and is then highlighted with white. The rim is then finished with Vallejo Flat Brown. Now, I have this Mordheim Turf by Citadel, which again I've had for a millennium or so, and so for the finishing touch, a little sprig of this grass is applied to his base with some super glue. And there we have it, Gandalf the Grey finished. You'll notice that off camera, I went back and fixed the beard, since it was still looking a little too blonde. I sorted that by mixing a little bit of grey wash and allowing that to settle into the recesses. So that's the first model from the Fellowship, and probably my favourite character from the Lord of the Rings. I hope you've enjoyed this deviation from the grimdark future. I'm definitely no expert on the Middle-earth strategy battle game, nor the history of the models, or probably even painting them, but I'm going to have a go, to expand my horizons. I intend to paint the rest of the Fellowship, probably not a video each, 2 or 3 more at most. I'm not sure I'll try the game. I'm not saying no, but I only have finite time. I have a real job, and I do need my sleep. But did you have any experience with any iteration of the Lord of the Rings games, or the miniatures made by Games Workshop? Maybe this was your gateway drug into the land of plastic crack. Do let me know in the comments. And if you like what I do, then please push all the buttons, check out my Instagram, and support me through Ko-fi if the spirit moves you. Your engagement, however small, is greatly appreciated. And allow me to finish with one of my favourite quotes about Gandalf from the writings of Tolkien. This is when he receives his ring, Narya, from Círdan. You may know it. It goes, "Take this ring, master, for your labours will be heavy, but it will support you in the weariness that you have taken upon yourself. For this is the ring of fire, and with it you may rekindle hearts in a world that grows chill." And with that, I better go paint some more minis. Take care, and thanks for watching.